Hello, and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our Medical and Laboratory Business at Intertech. And today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Rachael Gill. Hi, Rachael. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. So delighted to have you on the podcast today. So I'll give a brief introduction to you, Rachael, and then I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. So Rachael, you're a design researcher at Coventry University. And obviously you're working with the co-design for health and well-being, which is just such an exciting area. And I'm really anxious to talk to you more about that and see, how as an industry and how as manufacturers, we can look to designs that are more inclusive, more accessible, and really be more empathetic to the needs of different types of patients and patient populations. So Rachael, maybe just give a brief introduction to yourself, kind of where you are in the industry and how you got to be there.
Yeah, cool. Also, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to chat as well. As you said, I work in Coventry University just now. I'm doing my PhD in co-designing with and for young women with type 1. So I've been sort of working in that space for a few years now, and sort of through that exploring co-design as a method and design sort of thinking and how that can help designers and in that run also manufacturers to really like empathize with what people need and want from things, be it like products, service and systems. And sort of previous to that, I've done a bit of like research assistance work. I also did what feels like a lifetime ago an engineering degree. So within that, I did looked at sort of medical tech a little bit, and again through that how medical technology can be designed for people's needs and with and for people.
Yeah, so maybe you can just, when you talk about the phrase like co-design, what does that mean to you when you say that, when you say looking at co-design?
Yeah, so co-design is I feel like it's quite a hot word just now. It's used a lot. So yeah, but for me it means that the person or the people that it's designed for are involved within the process. So they are involved right at the beginning to sort of think about what they maybe need out of a product or what product they need in the first place or system. And then they help to sort of guide the decisions that you make through it. So they're sort of thought as people with expertise in the fact that they live with this condition every single day and they know what would and wouldn't work for them through that. So yeah, it's really about like having them as part of the team and like equals within the team.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing to see, and I think for us, the pandemic really kind of pushed this forward, but the individualized patient care and really thinking about patients first and a user-centered experience, right, for all patients, right, and really individualized healthcare. And I think having patients and people who are living with these conditions, chronic conditions, or having some sort of, adversities are being included in this process as they're going to be the ones who are using devices on an ongoing basis. So I think that's really important. Yeah,
definitely.
So a lot of what we do, of course, working with medical device manufacturers. So they're concerned, right? How are they supposed to ensure that their products are, easy to use, right? Or user-friendly for patients who have diverse abilities, different abilities, including those who have maybe limited dexterity, limited physical abilities, or even cognitive impairments. How can medical device manufacturers, ensure this through their product design process?
I would say like that it is about sort of testing and working with people that have these have that they are the end users of it. So it's important to make that easy to use through like every test that you do and every sort of the way that you think about a product, if that makes sense. I think that when, as a designer, if you do not have that sort of physical or cognitive understanding of the world, it can be difficult to put yourself in the shoes and like look at the thing that you've designed and be like, oh, this is how someone would interact with it, because you don't know, because you don't have that experience of that product or sort of the world around it. So I think it really is about speaking to the people, having them as a part of the process, and also taking those like steps of empathy to really think about okay, someone said this, what does that mean for this design? Taking yourself out of your experience and really sort of engaging with the things that you've created. And I think with ease of use as well, I think it becomes a lot about like simplicity, like how you can, I think when you design something, you sit with it for such a long time and you can remember how to use it because you've been working on it for 2 years.
Yeah.
But like someone who's seen it fresh, they might not know how to engage with it because they haven't been working with it for 2 years. So it's about, again, removing yourself and imagining that you're seeing it for the first time. How do you use it? What are the steps that you need to take? And I think like an example that I love is, I can't remember her name right now, but she was one of like a sort of pioneer of human computer interaction. And a study that she did is she filmed people trying to use printers and how much they really, really struggled with it, and then showed it to the person who like owned it. And they were like, oh, you know, that's their fault. And then she was like, they're actually the engineers that made those printers in the first place. And it shows that like you can like, that it is about that usability. And even if you have like the technical understanding of how that printer works, you still can't use it because the usability and the steps that you have to take from getting something to your laptop to printing is too complicated. So it's about like smoothing out that process.
Yeah.
I think that is again about like testing, doing these things like videoing how people use it. What are their pain points and how can you take them out? How can you smooth that out? Yeah, sorry, I feel like I'm
no, I think that's so relevant. It's so relevant, especially now, right? What we see with these trends in healthcare, moving to healthcare everywhere. Right now, healthcare is integrated into your day-to-day life, right? That's how people want it, right? So if you're using a device at home as a patient and you're using a device on yourself, or a caregiver who's using a device for a patient at home, and you're being expected to actually use these devices that are prescribed to you or that your doctor is asking you to use, if it's not easy to use, if it's not user-friendly, if it's not intuitive in some way, people aren't using it, right? We hear the example all the time that someone gets a device, you know, oh, here's your device, and they keep it in their bathroom under the sink and never take it out, never use it because it's complicated, right? And we see now that, you know, everyone wants to have these designs that are simplistic, right? It doesn't have to be the most complicated thing in the world, but what has to happen is that a patient actually has to use it, right, to make it worthwhile.
Definitely.
I think sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that like you see it time and time again with medical products, is that like it can have all these amazing features, but if it's too complex to use, then it's just not going to get used. And I think like it's about putting that like ease of use, like maybe even above other things. Like it first and foremost needs to be used to help people, and like it should help people as well. And if it becomes too complicated, I always think like, does this make someone's life harder rather than easier? And if it is like, if the learning about trying to learn the process of using it, if that's like takes so much time and so much frustration, that's going to make someone's life harder in that instance. And it's about designing and creating so that it eases, it creates like sort of flows between what you need to do rather than like sticky.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think there's this idea of people having like health anxiety and healthcare anxiety, right, of going to the doctor and having procedures and doing things like that. But that also exists, right, with a device that you're being asked to use yourself. If it makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious or like you're going to do something wrong or not use it correctly, then the whole point goes out the window. What I think is interesting with that too, right, is now we're also seeing with these advancements in technologies, all the different type of like assistive tools and technologies that are trying to be integrated. So if a medical device manufacturer is working to design a product and trying to like seamlessly integrate with some of these assistive technologies, are there ways that someone can do that so that way someone could rely on these different types of tools?
I think I would like try and think of because I think sometimes when you're designing, you can think of how someone uses like just that product because that's like what you're designing and what you're focusing on. But it's also important to think about like the whole picture, like holistically, how will someone engage with this? And like through that, then you start to see it as like a system of things that it can integrate with and it can become seamless, but also I think it's about making sure, again, that those things are done well. Like, so for instance, if you, like in my research, I looked a little bit like at insulin pumps, and a lot of them will like sync up to a phone, which is great. But if that's like the only way that you can read it, then it can become a problem. Like, what if the sensor fails? What if it's not working? What if that person doesn't have a phone at all, or it's like run out of charge? So I think it's about, again, making sure that these points of integration are done like smoothly, so that they make it easier, rather than become a sticking point that is more difficult. And yet I think like thinking about the whole system and how, like I saw another great project which was about like kitchen design, and you can think about like one product and how that can be designed inclusively, or you can think in the scale of a whole kitchen and how like when you're making something, you're not just using one thing, you're using multiple. How can that like integrate? And the actual movement about the kitchen. There was a great designer who reconfigured the kitchen to make it easier to, but it's a whole system. And I think that can be quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think too, it's not just like the integrating for the sake of integrating. So I think the example is perfect, right? Of products that connect to the phone. What is your intention, right? Why are you doing that, right? It's not just, oh, let's integrate it or have it, be on an app or whatever, just for the sake of saying, oh, we have an application that you can use this with. But like, what is the end goal? What is the intention of doing that? Is that improving? Is it improving patient experience? Yeah,
definitely. That reminds me of another one where like I watched this film and they got invaded by aliens, and they had to start their car with their phone. And it was this like great tense scene, but like that became almost completely unusable in that instance. And I thought, like, as a designer, I was like, oh, that clearly is not working in that like emergency situation. And it's just what you're saying, like, is the integration solving an issue? Is it making the use easier? And I think again, that's about like user studies. Like, if you see how someone uses it, do they just like completely not engage with the integration, or does it make the use easier? And sort of asking these questions that I think can sometimes be difficult, not only just because they take time, but like it can be hard to look for where your product's wrong. But I think that's all the questions that you need to ask, like, because it's where it's wrong that it might fail someone. So it's really about picking them out to make sure that the user experience is as good as possible. Because I think that the stakes are like high when it's something like a medical device. It's not like car starting for aliens, it's someone's life, and this needs to work, and this needs to work 24/7. So it's making sure that is easily done. And as you're saying about like anxiety and using this, that it feels trustworthy, it feels you're not worried that the connection might be lost, or that you can like trust it and use it with ease and almost like enjoy using it. I would say is always the sort of goal.
Yeah, and that you see the benefit, or you see the value as a patient, right? That you know that it's helping your health in some way, that it's helping your overall, taking preventative care better, or taking care of a chronic condition, right? That you're actually seeing that it's worthwhile to use it, versus like, this perception, like, oh, you go into the doctor's office and you feel like you're getting something done, right? You feel like you're either having a procedure, or you're getting diagnosed with something, or you're monitoring something. But if you have the device yourself, you want to feel like, oh, what I'm doing is actually improving my healthcare.
Yeah. Exactly.
I want to get a little bit into some specifics. So with things like visual impairments, right? Like this comes up a lot with people who have some level of issue with their vision, some sort of visual impairment. So what are some things or design considerations that someone should be thinking about to enhance, making these products easier for people who have these issues with visual impairment?
So I think like some of the things that come up time and time again with this is like making sure that you can understand the information as quickly and as easily as possible. So it's things like the size of text, the contrast, because I think there's a balance of like for some people it might be more difficult, for some people it might be easier, for certain contrasts. Like for myself, I have Arlene syndrome, so high contrast is really difficult, but for visual impairments that can make it a lot easier to read. So it's sort of balancing these things with contrast and size. And I think there's also something about like visual simplicity and visual complexity, because there's things like you can have pop-ups and you can have like a website and there'll be like hundreds of adverts, and that is going to be, because it's so visually intense, it's really difficult to work out where the information is. So I think it's about being able to look at a product or look at a page and really clearly understand what each bit is telling you. So it's not just the text itself, it's the construction of the thing and how you're presenting that information. And I think something that I find quite interesting as well is design affordances, I think it's called. So it's how it looks like it should do what it's meant to do. So you don't have to necessarily read the like close button. You can see that it's a close button because of the color, because of the shape. So that the design itself lends to what you know already and what you can sort of engage with. And again, like coming back to that, there's the learnability of it, how easy or difficult it is for this thing to learn. And there was one other thing. Yes, the balancing it with how it looks too. I think that's really important, because you see so many things that they might be easy to read. They might be like nice sizes and like easy to use, but like they're not something that someone wants in their home, and they're not something that's used. They don't want, people don't want to be labelled by the things they own.
Yeah.
And that can be like the sort of group that I work with is young women, and that's a sort of age where you have this like social anxiety of how people view you. And I don't think that goes away as you age. So I think there's something about that, like making sure that it's also something that you want to own. I think you should still, like, people deserve nice things.
Yeah, of course,
like, and to like want what they have, not feel like, oh, I have to have this version of it. It should be like, this is beautiful in and of itself.
Yeah.
I think finally as well, like creating things, like so many people will have a form of visual impairment throughout their life. And also, like, if it's easier to read, it'll be easier for everyone to read and use.
Yeah.
So I think it is about like, it's a sort of universal design principles that it, like, designing for easeability of use helps everyone use it too.
Yeah, and I think it's, there's such a spectrum with visual impairment, and I think, so many people are compensating in ways that they might not even realize, right? When you're thinking about younger populations, elderly populations, people, you see everybody, right? Like holding something close and far away. It doesn't matter, right? You don't have to be talking about a severe visual impairment, right? We're talking about this whole wide spectrum that, if you have a device that, as you say, is difficult, or it has so many buttons, or so much text, or it's so the contrast isn't clear, like, it can really impact anybody. And the other thing that I love that you touched on, I know that you've done a lot of this in your work and in your study, is this idea that, a lot of times patients have these kind of inherent feelings about themselves with chronic conditions or different types of illnesses, right? That they think that it says something about them. And then having a device that people are aware of or see that you're using then says something about who you are, right? That you are, on a dialysis machine, or that you are, measuring your insulin levels and your blood sugar, because people have this feeling that, oh, this says something about me because people can tell that I have this chronic condition or this illness. And I think making it where it's something that is, integrated into your life in a way that is not so obtrusive and not so, oh, look at me, look at this. This is the condition that I have, and this is how I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a real like balance that, like, I've seen in a few things that I've like worked on and a few things that I've read, that like sometimes there can be like an empowerment of like, I'm showing this and I'm really proud of the fact that I have this condition, because it shows a part of me, it shows things that I've been through. But there's also like I don't want to show it, I don't want to be seen as to be different, can be really challenging for people. And that also, like, not even necessarily that it might be the look. People don't want to be questioned of like, what is that? Like the way that people that I've like worked with in my research is like, there's days where I just don't want to talk about it. And I don't want someone to sort of question me. So having something that like identifies you as having a disability can be something that is a real struggle. And I think I saw like the sort of body image statistics are like people that have a disability are more likely to have body image struggles. So I think that's sort of like, and I think the way that we design things, it needs to be integrated into too, because again, it's like if it makes you so uncomfortable to wear it, you're not going to wear it. Like loads
of course,
that I've spoke to have been like, I used to have XYZ and now I don't use it because I just hate the way it feels. So I think it's important to understand that as a part of functionality. I think there's always this like form, function, where does it sit? And I think like, they are so interlinked when it's like people have it as a part of like who they are and their identity and a thing that they have, that they shouldn't be thought of as two completely separate things, I think.
Yeah, and it really goes back to your earlier points too, which is why it's so important to integrate patients as part of your design process, right? Because you want these people to really want to be using these devices, regardless, right? Full spectrum. And so I think you have to realize as part of your design process that even if you make the most amazing technology, if someone doesn't want to use it or they feel a certain way about it, they're just not going to use it, regardless of if they know it can improve their life in some way, regardless of if they know if they should, they still won't, right? I mean, it's human nature. We know that. So I think that's why really tying it back to how important it is to include patients and include people who are living with those conditions, living with disabilities, living as part of the process in the design. So you can make sure that you're really considering them as part of that overall design process.
And like their experience of them as well. I think like in my work, like type 1 is thought of as like an invisible condition. But I think the way that like any condition sort of can affect how you engage with this tech, and how that can affect how you go about your life, how you engage with other people, like people asking you things, like ripples into bits of your life because it becomes something that you use every single day. That I think as someone who isn't using it, like I've discovered so much about how people engage with it that I just would have thought of or could have thought of. So it is about like, just what you said, it is definitely about like having people as a part of the process, and I also think like making sure they know that they're like valued within the process. It's such a thing of like, I think I've been quite lucky to work with people that are like young women, and there's been quite a like, how do I put it, like, because I'm also a young woman, that sort of like hierarchy and like power that it hasn't really been there too much, or I've tried quite hard to like make sure it's not there as much as possible, as much as you can. And I think that's been really, really important, because like if someone feels like, I don't know, that they might tell their doctor that they don't know, or that they're not using it, or they feel like they're going to offend the person that they're talking to, or they want to feel like they're saying the right thing. I think it's really about making sure not just that they're involved, but they're really like know that they're valued and that their opinions are valued.
And that they can be honest, of course. I think that's such a true point too, right? That they can actually provide honest feedback. With that kind of makes me think a little bit more too. So we look at the visual impairments, but what about things like hearing impairments, right? We know that a lot of medical devices and technologies include audible alarms and different types of tones, but obviously there's a lot of people who are using medical technologies who have some level of hearing impairment or some hearing loss or hearing issues. So through the design process, what can people be thinking about as alternate methods for those who maybe struggle with the actual, tones or audible type signals that come from medical devices?
I think that is an interesting question. I think I would always like pull it back to like, what are you trying to communicate? And then through that can really influence how you design an alarm and how you can. So for instance, like if it's an alarm that someone's at your door, that doesn't need to be like an alarm or an alert that's really intense. Like it could be like a notification on your phone, because that loads of people have that anyway, and it can be really easily integrated in. And I think you can do lots of things with like visual and haptic, I think that's the right word, like engaging other senses. And I think you can be like innovative with that, but I think also need to make sure that it doesn't become overloading. So I worked in a project where it was about designing kitchen scales for people with visual impairments. And the one thing that sort of came back a few times was that like the like tone of the alarm, and that loads of stuff in their kitchen is designed with alarms, and that there was just stuff beeping all over the place. And it was really like overwhelming. And it led to it being like, because obviously like, you know, like even like the microwave makes a really high pitched noise.
Yeah.
Like some toasters do that too. So it becomes like a stressful environment.
Yeah.
Multiple things, it's all high pitched, and it's all, I think if you're doing any form of alarm, you need to think about, again, it's sort of like not just the thing in isolation, but how does it sit holistically as someone uses it? Like they might just not just be using your products, they might be using other ones too. Like how does that really sit in someone's life? And especially like the tone. So I know that I'm going back to visual impairment, sorry.
No, but I think it's so true, yeah.
And it can be like people get like alarm like fatigue and will just turn it off. Like a thing that I was sort of thinking about with like, if you have maybe like it alerts you every time something happens, then if that gets wrong, if that maybe is alerting you too much, you're just going to take it off. Like if it's like every time, I don't know, like the curtain blows across your door, it goes off, like that's not going to last an afternoon. So it's about like, again, seeing how is that used, not just in a lab or in like where you're designing, but how does it actually fit in someone's life with all the other things they're doing, all the like real life things that happen and constraints, like how does that affect how someone uses it? I think.
Yeah, I think that's just such great points. You know, with medical devices, right, throughout the process, there's standards that device manufacturers has to comply with for alarms, and I think it's really important to make sure that you're looking at it from both sides, right? With how do you meet the requirements of the standards that are set that you must comply with, right, to make sure that your device is safe, but then at the same time considering a much broader population, especially when you're talking about these devices. I mean, the home setting is just always such a great example. You know, talking about a kitchen, right? If someone has their refrigerator open and it's beeping because they want you to close the door, and the microwave's going off because you're finished with something, and then your phone is beeping. I mean, you could just be so overloaded with just like sensory around you that it's, you know, how do you make sure that when you're designing, you're thinking about all of those things, especially with these devices that, you know, I'm wearing it with me as I'm walking through the mall or as I'm going to the airport, and I have all of these sounds around me. If my device is making a tone or making some sort of sound or audio,
how am I going to actually feel and hear that?
Exactly, right? I mean, if I'm walking through the airport and I'm hearing all of these other things, right, is that even going to be the most effective way to alert me that I need to take a measurement or communicate with my doctor or take a dose of a drug or whatever it might be?
I think so. There's a thing of, sorry.
No, please go for it. Yeah.
Just as well, I think it's interesting that you should sort of be able to, I think there's a bit of how you adapt it to yourself as well. Because like obviously everyone, you can create your own like phone tone, and like I think being able to have that choice of maybe what the alarm sounds like, how often it goes off, what are like the levels of sensitivity that you want to deal with, and that gives the like autonomy over like what you're using. It gives you the choice of like when you're alerted, how you're alerted, to becoming like your thing and how you want it to be. And I think also that changing is important, because you get like a few of the people that I worked with said that they stopped hearing their insulin pump because they just have heard it so much, and that like it doesn't even wake them up in the night anymore.
Just becomes background noise. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like if maybe they're having a period where their bloods are really difficult, that it might be useful to be able to change the tone.
Yeah.
That it becomes something new again, or that just like different. And like another thing of like, I think it's interesting thinking again about how you do alerts. Something that came up is like, they maybe don't want an alert when they're in somewhere like a lecture theatre, or like, and everyone turns around and looks at them, like obviously they need to know about their blood levels, but is there ways that they can change it to be on silent mode if they need to, or like but still be safe. Like it could be vibration, it could be. So yeah, I think that kind of ties back into like the experience and the real like complexity of using a thing.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the visual impairments, the hearing impairments, but I want to talk a little bit before we close about physical impairments, right? So thinking about the design for those who have maybe different levels of physical abilities, right? Dexterity, things like that. So when you're looking at it from a design process with, ergonomics and comfort and everything that's related to the physical aspects of products and devices, what are some thoughts that you consider or would think to consider as part about design when you're thinking about actual physical impairments in use of a product?
I think it's really it's really important to make sure you do consider ergonomics. Like I've got people that I know and studied with, like work in industry, and they said it's really difficult to find ergonomics of anyone that's not 6'2" and male. So you have to then do the work as a designer. Like you have to go out and find, like, how does someone that, for instance, is in a wheelchair, how do they interact with this? Or someone who has a prosthetic limb, how do they move through using this? And I think it is about doing that work, and it is about, again, understanding how someone uses it, getting people in part of the process, and doing, I think like the studies. I'll come back to that, but like really engaging with that. And I think when it is about like comfort and ergonomics, if someone has a disability, the last thing you want to do is if they have any pain at all, make it worse.
Yeah, of course.
Things like ergonomics become like crucial to how you design them. I think there is sort of like I think there is like a more moral perspective of it too, that it is sort of your like duty as a designer to make sure that this is something that people makes their life more comfortable, rather than more so. And I think like you just like the work needs to be done within that.
Yeah, and I think it's so important too when you think about that as a spectrum as well, like the person who's using the device and their physical ability and their physical comfort, or if there's a provider or administrator of that device to someone, right, working with someone who maybe has a physical impairment, right? It's not just a one size fits all. You really have to think about, what is the technology? What is the device that you're using? How is it administered? Is it something you're expecting someone to use, do, integrate with themselves, or are you expecting a user with a provider, right? So I think it's just so important to look at that kind of end to end and really say, okay, what are we treating here? Who are we treating? Who are the populations that we're looking at? And making sure that there's just no one size fits all approach to any of this, right? And there's just so many things to consider to make these devices more accessible, more healthcare for all, more equitable, right? So it's not just, I mean, you pointed out so well, so it's not just looking at a very singular population that has been studied, right?
And also that probably like doesn't exist. That's what I always say. That's like ideal. There's maybe about 2 people that are that size. But I think another thing that you said that I think is quite interesting is about like the provider and like if someone is giving care, that it also should be designed for them as well. And it needs to be like designed to be used and designed, because like someone that I work with, they did a research study where they went and looked at products within care homes, and like quite a lot of them like just weren't used because they weren't designed for the person who was using them, and they were maybe like created sore backs for them, or they were really cumbersome, they're really difficult to use. So it is like thinking about everyone that's involved around this product or system and making sure that, because it might not, for like example of a care home, it might not be the person who's getting the care who makes decisions about what they're using. So it is about making sure that it fits with sort of everyone that uses it, I think.
Yeah. Well, and especially now, I mean, we're seeing this trend, right? Obviously globally, of aging populations, people getting older, the use of care facilities, nursing homes, different home care type facilities is just more and more prevalent as people get older. There's more chronic illnesses, right? And so that comes into play even more, right? We're just having this huge population globally of people who are elderly and in these types of care facilities or receiving care in their own homes. And now as an industry, right, within the medical industry, we have to be thinking more about, okay, how is our entire way that people are receiving healthcare changing? It's not just doctors' offices, clinics, hospitals anymore, right? It's really in your day-to-day life, from preventative care, right, all the way through to treatment. So really, really interesting. Well, Rachael, this was so please, so go ahead.
No. I was like, I will go on for hours if you let me.
Yes, and I it's such an important topic, and I think something that we'll likely have a lot more conversations about, just as we see these types of products becoming more inclusive and really considering more people within the population. And so I really appreciate your time, Rachael. It was so interesting to talk to you about this. Yeah,
I've really enjoyed being on it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. If anyone has questions, you can of course reach out and we will connect you directly. Thank you guys so much for joining, and thank you again, Rachael, for joining the podcast.
Thank you.